was jobless, and I had been working, if you can call it that, as a musician and an artist, and was really between I didn't know what. And I got a call from my mom one day, of blessed memory, and she said, "Hey kid, you want to go with me to Auschwitz?" I'm like, "Mom, what are you talking about?" She said, "Well, the monks, they're doing a pilgrimage and it's starting in Auschwitz." My mom had been a unbelievably huge mess when I was a little kid. And when she came out of that huge mess, when I was a slightly bigger kid, she got very involved in politics. She got very involved in trying to clean up messes, which is often the way that messes work in our lives, right? You get yourself into a situation that's painful and awful and causes a lot of suffering. And if you're lucky and you have a moment of redemption, then you might set your heart towards fixing those same potholes that you fell into, which was very much my mom's way. And part of the people on her road crew were this group of Japanese Buddhist monks who were committed to creating a world of peace. And so she had gotten involved with them, and she did various things. Mostly their practice is to get out in the streets and go to places that are very broken, where there's a lot of suffering, and go and offer themselves there as witnesses. And they do these pilgrimages, and apparently they were doing one that was starting in Auschwitz. Definitely a place of a lot of suffering. So I said, "Well, when is this pilgrimage starting, Mom?" And she said, "In December." Oh, apparently nobody here has ever been to Poland in December. And I'm like, "Oh, that's great. Poland in December, I can hardly wait." I said, what is it with you, Mom? And she said, "Well, you want to go or not, I'll pay your way." And I said, "Well, why don't you send me some information about it?" So she sent me some information about it, and it turned out that it was going to be a 9-month pilgrimage from Auschwitz to Hiroshima. Now you're with me. Now you're with me. And I said, of course. Maybe this is why why God has cleared my deck so that I can go and do this. And so I signed up to do the first 3 months of walking. And they walk like 20 miles a day. So what this was, it was an international interfaith pilgrimage for peace and life to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. It started in Auschwitz on the day that the death marches started. And we ended in Hiroshima on the 50th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. And the first 3 months included walking across Europe, and that meant going through the former Yugoslavia during the war, and then a month walk in Israel, Palestine, and then that's as much as I could commit to do. And then it wound its way around the world until it ended up in Hiroshima, where I met up with them for the last 3 weeks so that I could finish the walk. So you start thinking about these things, and I was in my 30s, and it seemed like a very romantic and noble, holy kind of undertaking. But that doesn't take into consideration how your feet are going to feel about that. That's some fantasy of what the spiritual life looks like. But I will tell you that walking 20 miles a day in a broken, heartbreaking place, starting in a heartbreaking place, and walking specifically and intentionally to people who are still suffering, to people who are traumatized and angry, furious, rageful, or just so depressed and broken that they don't even care. That's a true calling. And the people who were called to that true calling were a mess. What can I tell you? It was the most annoying group of people I think I've ever spent time with in my entire life. Because walking your talk when you're walking that much, as it turns out, is pretty hard to do. And so every day began with morning prayer, which was awesome. And the Buddhists, it was led by this group of Buddhists from Japan. And it was their project. And we were Buddhists and Jews and every flavor of Christianity, and the occasional Hindu or Muslim would join us. And you could walk for a day or the entire 9 months, because they were Buddhists. They were detached. They didn't care. There was no, you didn't have to raise a certain amount of money to walk. You didn't have to do anything except say yes to morning prayer and no inebriation. That was it. Everything else was up to you. Unbelievable. What happens when you create those conditions? So the Buddhists were always up in front, and they chant, they use a little drum, and they chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo the whole freaking day. They don't believe in bathroom breaks. I tell you, try it. Especially anybody who's not used to using a urinal, try it. Try relieving yourself on the side of the road while the march is taking off down the snowy road, and then you're running behind them, yanking your pan. Unbelievable. That's holy work. You find out really quickly. That's holy work. It's holy work to say to the shojin, the head monk, dude, you have to let the ladies use the restroom in a place that is acceptable for them to use the restroom. It is not acceptable to pull off the side of the road and expect the ladies to have the same experience as the gentlemen, because they won't, and it's not right. So you know who had that conversation with the monks? The Jews. The Jews were constantly complaining. We were constantly saying, this isn't right, you can't do that, stop, whatever, fakate. And the monks were always like, And the Christians were going, It was the most amazing study in interreligious comparisons or whatever, right? Comparative religion that you could ever imagine. And I've thought about it so much since, and I learned so much from my Buddhist brothers and sisters about what it means to take that breath that we were talking about. Because Jews don't believe in breathing. We only believe in exhaling with words. I definitely learned how to inhale from my dear teachers in that world. But I also learned that our differences, when we brought them together and we learned each other's stories and we understood each other's ethic and each other's mythologies and iconic moments, helped us to keep moving that pilgrimage down the way. Because some days we really needed a Jewish perspective, and some days we really needed a Christian perspective, and some days we really needed a Muslim perspective, and some days we really needed a Buddhist perspective, because we encountered everything on the road. Everything. Beauty, danger, discomfort, suffering. And one of the things that I've thought about in these many years since is how every spiritual tradition is really based on what do we do about suffering. At the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to figure out. At the end of the day, we know that suffering turns us into the worst versions of ourselves or the best. And spiritual technologies that have arisen out of human existence are simply there to help us find those that help us be our best in the face of suffering. And these three iconic moments in the three traditions that we're looking at today, Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhism. There are these iconic moments where there's an aha. The aha of the river, the aha of the Bodhi tree, and the aha of the mountain in the desert. Penny just read you that aha moment from a Jewish perspective. And what it looks like in Judaism is fire and noise, clamor, terror, actually, a shaking mountain. Well, that's where God meets us. It's God. Just find out if I'm getting the story right, okay? Because I hate it when I get busted in mid-sermon. Oh yeah, definitely God. I know that ring anywhere. That the Jewish response to suffering tends to be activated and terrified. We tend to approach it in one of three ways. We engage it and we fight it. We say, yes, it's there, and we are going to do everything we can to obliterate it. We're going to fight back. We're going to stand up for justice. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And you see that Jews are overly represented in almost every social justice concern, because it's part of how we alleviate suffering. And like every other tradition, how do we alleviate suffering without becoming so embittered and embattled that we forgot why we started the fight in the first place? That's one of the things that Judaism has to wrestle with constantly. How do we not become our own bitterness? The second way is to delegate. The Israelites say, after 10 utterances of a direct connection with God on that mountain, near that mountain, with that mountain, the Israelites say, enough. Enough. You do it. They ask Moses to be the intermediary. And on the one hand, it looks like it's giving up, and on the other hand, what it's actually doing is saying, we can't do this alone, we have to do this in relationship. The only way we can do this is in relationship. And what they were experiencing was a personal moment of revelation. It was overwhelming. They couldn't do it as individuals. They recognized that when we do this as a collective, and each person holds a certain amount of it, then we can maybe carry it. But I can't carry it alone. You think you can carry it alone? Great, go carry it. But I know I can't. It's a genius moment. And it's part of the reason that Jewish communities are so strong, why we still cling to interpersonal relationship as a place where we meet God. And the third is encoded in that moment. You wouldn't know it on the surface, but if you study Judaism, you know that many years later, this whole group of people who were not priests and they weren't prophets, they were rabbis, emerged. And the rabbis said, oh, we were there too. We were just stealth. We were just in the background. You couldn't see what we were doing because what we did was burrow under the suffering. And we started looking for the gems. We started looking for the mother lode of wisdom. We started looking for the raw diamond. We started looking for the ore that we could then smelt into precious metals. That engagement with the muck, knowing that buried in it is something beautiful, if we would only dirty ourselves enough to find it. Now, I'm pretty sure that your Rabbi was deeply engaged in that third way. I'm pretty sure that he didn't shy away from ugly, messy, painful suffering. He sort of stuck his hand in and reached around until he found something that felt like it had some potential, that it could be redeemed, that it could be faceted to shine and to glimmer and to glint. And I'm pretty sure that my Buddhist friends tended to be in a quiet way, in a very quiet and subtle way, like the first. They were fighting for justice. They were fighting for equality. They just did it in a way that didn't turn them completely bitter. That what they put in front of them was, do not become the suffering. And the only way to do that was to put a little gap. But those three methodologies of bonding together as human beings engaged in a common experience of how do we engage with and experience suffering without becoming it, is what we're all here trying to figure out. What's our path? And so we get these three beautiful, beautiful metaphors of the tree, right, which grows ever so slowly and quietly. You have to just be with it. And so, of course, Siddhartha's enlightenment comes after he sits still, motionless, with the tree for 49 days. So interesting that it took the Jews 49 days to get from crossing the Red Sea to that mountain. There are ways in which we have these resonances and these common understandings that are so beautiful, and it's so great that we've got multiple ways of telling these stories. We've got a shaking, noisy, burning, smoking mountain. They've got the Bodhi tree. Y'all have the river. Now, rivers are tricky. They look so soft, fluid, but they will cut a gorge through stone if you just let them flow long enough. So I think one of the things that we're here to do is really discover what is it that we can do ourselves in our own lives. What modalities? Who do we need to meet? What do we need to fight? What do we need to go with? Where do we need to find the gem so that we can live in a world that is filled with suffering and probably always will be, with joy and love and compassion. That we don't have to become the suffering of our world. Rather, we can mine it for all it's worth, encounter it with confidence and grace, and continually find a way to bring about our souls unfolding in redemption here, for us, for our children, for their children, and for God's big, solidly beating heart. Amen, amen, amen.